I am God. I will bring you out from under the cruel, hard labor of Egypt. I will rescue you from slavery. I will redeem you, intervening with great acts of judgment. I'll take you as my own people, and I'll be God to you. You'll know that I am God, your God, who brings you out from under the cruel, hard labor of Egypt. I'll bring you into the land that I promised to give Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and give it to you as your own country. I am God. But when Moses delivered this message to the Israelites, they didn't even hear him. They were that beaten down in the spirit by the harsh slave conditions.
Then God said to Moses, "Go and speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, so that he will release the Israelites from his land." Moses answered God, "Look, the Israelites won't even listen to me. How do you expect Pharaoh to? And besides, I stutter." But God again laid out the facts to Moses and Aaron regarding the Israelites and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he again commanded them to lead the Israelites out of the land of Egypt.
Oh, good morning. Those two are my kiddos, Sam and Izzy. It's kind of a family affair this morning for us. There's some feedback stuff going on up here. I don't know if I've told you this lately, but I love y'all. I really do. I really love being a part of this community because we are starting a new series on what it means to be subversive in a culture that is trying to hold down and oppress and disenfranchise brothers and sisters who are immigrating here to the United States. And I love that we are the kind of community that understands that these are the kinds of conversations that we need to be having, and that the lives of our brothers and sisters matter, and they matter to us in this community. And I find that the thing that I appreciate about Valley and Mountain so much is that we don't only talk about these things, but we try to figure out practical ways that we can be involved and that we can get involved and that we can care day to day for brothers and sisters in our community. I'm not John. My name's DeAnza, in case the height didn't give it away. And so I'm one member here at Valley and Mountain, and so I'm going to be talking a little bit today about what we need in terms of companionship, particularly at this time with the immigration crisis that's going on. And John called me a few weeks ago and he said, I really want to start this series in July to begin asking the question, how do we have faith without borders? How do we push back against those oppressive forces and live out a faith that goes beyond borders? And for me, as a person that is working around immigration, I do research around immigration. I've been talking with women for the last several months about what it has been like for them to go through the immigration process here, while also trying to find safety from domestically violent relationships. And the thing that I've heard time and time and time again is that not only are women trying to flee abuse within their homes, they're also leaving their home countries because they're being targeted by the cartel. And so it is no longer safe for them to be here, and they're seeking asylum. And for most of the women that I've talked to, the majority of them were here seeking asylum, and only a few of them have actually received asylum status and are still going through that process and don't really have a clear indication as to what the outcomes of that will look like for them. And so as a person who's been just kind of ruminating on these stories, listening and being with women that are dealing with this, that are trying to find a way of safety and a way to survive an oppressive system back at home, in their actual homes, and now here in the United States, to make a better life for their children, I've just been broken over this. I've just been so broken over this. And trying to ask myself the question of what more can I do? How can I be a better companion? How can I be a caring neighbor, somebody that's willing to maybe take some risks to stand in the gap for these women and their children? Not too long ago, we here at Valley and Mountain went to ICE Detention Center, actually the offices of ICE in Tukwila, and we set up a protest, and during that time, we demanded that the end of these targeting practices of immigration families would stop. We also demanded that there would be an end to the separation of families. And since that time, just in April, over the last several weeks, what we've learned is that nearly 2,000 children have been taken from their parents. We've learned that although Trump has signed an executive order to end the separation of families, that the children that have already been separated, there is no indication, no information about how they'll be reunited with their parents. We've learned that the separation of families is still ongoing. We've learned that the zero tolerance policy states that immigrants crossing the borders will be detained indefinitely. We've learned that those who are fleeing domestic violence or gang violence will not be granted asylum status. And meanwhile, while all these voices of outrage are rising, what we have is someone like Sessions coming out using scripture to justify these heinous acts against humanity, against these immigrant families. We are told that this is normal. We are told that this is the way it's supposed to be. We are told that this is for our safety. And it must be said, none of this is normal. We are not living in a normal time. None of this is the way it has to be. What is normal is that people move about, they migrate every single day. That is part of our human experience. And that when we're not safe, what is normal is that we go to places where we can seek safety and where we can seek refuge. And what is the human decent thing to do is to provide refuge and to provide safe havens for families. And so today, this is a start of a conversation that we'll be having all throughout July about how do we practice a faith that crosses borders, and also how do we practice a faith that defies the powers of empire that would oppress the most vulnerable in our communities. A few years back, I had this amazing opportunity to do some research in Istanbul. I was really excited. This professor called me kind of last minute, asked me if I would come over there, meet him. And so I booked tickets. I got a flight to Istanbul, not with one connection, not with two connection, not with three, with four. But I was excited and I was raring to go, so I got on that plane and went. And there were some complications that occurred through my travels. And when I got to Istanbul, I was exhausted, I was ready to take a shower, I was ready to get to a bed. I found that my luggage did not make it to my final destination. And so I decided, well, I'm just gonna go to my Airbnb and I'll figure this out in the morning. The next day, I got on the phone, I was calling airports all over Europe, I swear. I was on the phone for like 5 hours trying to sort out what was happening with this bag. And I realized as I was sitting there on the phone, finally, I was like, I'm gonna have to just take a bus. I'm gonna have to go back to the airport. I need to speak to someone face to face to figure out what's going on. So I get on a bus, I get back over to the airport, and there is no signs. There's no instructions as to where I'm supposed to go, where the luggage that are incoming and being held there at the airport, where that department is. And so I'm kind of meandering around this airport, and I find this information booth, and this person tells me at this information booth, you need to go to this wall just a little bit south of here, and on this wall is this phone, and you just pick it up. I said, oh, okay, I can do that. So I meandered off, found this phone. It literally was just a phone with a receiver. There was not even any buttons to dial anything. You just picked it up, and someone somewhere else was going to answer it on the other end. So I picked it up, and sure enough, I get this voice. And this voice is talking to me in Turkish, and I'm trying to explain to them in English what's going on with my bags. And I don't understand, and I don't know if they understood, but what I gathered from this conversation was he wanted me to just wait where I was. So I hung up the phone and I just waited, and a few minutes later, this man comes out and he's talking to me in Turkish, and I'm trying to explain, and I'm pulling out all these papers, and this is my luggage number, and where do I go? And he just looks at me, he's like, passport. And I said, oh, okay. So I pull out my passport, and he takes it, and he takes my documents, and he's like, wait, and he just walks away. And we're in the middle of the airport. Like, we're not even at like a desk. We're just in the middle of the airport. So at this point in time, I'm starting to think, was this person the person I was supposed to meet with? Is this the help that's coming? Like, I don't know. I've just violated Travel 101 rule. Don't give away your passport to anyone. Don't let it leave your sight, that kind of thing. But then I noticed that he walks over to this other area, and all these people start to gather around him, and they're kind of yelling at him. He's kind of yelling at them, and there's all this chaos going on, and he starts grabbing all of their passports too. And it's just like this passport collection center that he's got going on, and he puts it all in the stack. And I began, again, to panic and go, oh my gosh, like, how am I gonna get out of this situation? I have no clue what to do. And I remember, for even the briefest moment, thinking, I could really use some help right now. I could really use somebody to come alongside me in this moment and help me explain what it is I'm trying to do here, and explain to me what is happening, and how I can now not only get my bag but also get my passport back. I'm going to pass around. I had a PowerPoint set up for today, and technology isn't my friend, so I made some printouts of some things that I'll pass around. I made 15 of them, and I think people can share. As a researcher in the field of international psychology, we do a lot of work around acculturation theory. And what we're really trying to understand in acculturation psychology is we're trying to examine migration patterns of people. We want to know why people move, how people move, where people move to, and then the outcomes that people experience through their migration. And one of the things that we know as acculturation theorists is that migration is something that happens every single day, and that migration is something that we all participate in on a daily basis, because the word migrate is really a word for movement, or to move about. And so every single day, we are moving about. We're moving to our jobs and to school and to be closer to family or to be near friends or community. Sometimes we're moving just across town. Sometimes we're moving to another city. Sometimes we're moving across the state. Sometimes we even move to different countries for all of these reasons. And so when acculturation theorists talk about this process, they talk about it in this handy-dandy framework kind of way that you can look at, is they talk about the motivations, the decisions, the migration itself, this in-betweenness, and then the final destination is what we're interested in. And so the motivation really has to do with why. What's the reason for why we're moving? It could be for school, like I said, or work, or for another opportunity. People also move because they need to be safe. So if they're in danger, they need to move. They need to go to places where they're going to be safe. We see this with domestic violence survivors all the time, needing to make decisions day to day about how they're going to get to safety, and having to leave homes, having to leave family systems, having to leave whole communities in order to be safe. Sometimes going into hiding so that they're not found in order to be safe. So people make decisions all of the time regarding why they need to leave. And then people come to this point of making that decision. And the way that people weigh out the possibility of staying or going is that they do what we kind of call a cost-benefits analysis, where they look at what are the costs and benefits to staying and what are the costs and benefits to leaving. And sometimes there are costs and benefits on both sides. But in terms of the folks that I talk to in immigration, when they're coming here and they're seeking asylum or they're seeking safety, sometimes the risks to go are even though they see it and they understand it and they know that there are risks to go, those risks are not as great as the risks to stay, and so they choose to go. And then we talk about the actual migration itself, and what migration really is about is it's about this crossing of a boundary, or crossing of boundaries. It is really about a crossing of point A, a known territory, to point B, an unknown territory. And what can happen through the migration is where we get into this part right here, this in-betweenness state, where there are steps or there are stages that need to occur in order to get to that final destination place. And oftentimes in this in-betweenness space, there's a bunch of barriers that can make it difficult. Sometimes the barriers are just things that we need to learn so that we can get through and walk through each of the steps. Sometimes these barriers are just learning a new environment, figuring out what resources are available to us. There might be different customs or different traditions that we need to understand to get through this. Sometimes the barriers are purposefully placed there as barricades to make it impossible to get to the next point, to get to our final destination. And so the way that we navigate those barriers is what we call protective factors. There are those things that are sometimes specialized skills or knowledge that we might have that help us get through that system, but oftentimes it is the people that come alongside of us that help us get through that situation so that we can get to our final destination. If we use this theory and we plugged in my story that I just said about my migration story to Istanbul, we'd see that I fit within all of these, and that in this in-between space where I was stuck between, basically we had some language barriers, there were some customs, there were some systematic things that I didn't understand, that I didn't know. I really could have used someone to help or support or translate for me what was going on so that I could navigate that system. It is part of our human condition to move. And there are many meaningful, personal reasons for why we decide to move. And as much as it is part of our human condition to move, it is also part of our human condition to get stuck, to get in the in-betweens. And when we get in the in-betweens, it is very much part of our experience to need support, to need companions, to need help. Exodus is an epic migration story. It is a story of oppression, and it is a story of liberation. It is a story about a powerful empire that is oppressing and enslaving the Israelite people. This empire, the Egyptian empire, is a brutal government that tortures, that maims, that displaces, and that restricts the freedoms of the Israelite people. And Egypt at this time could be thought of as an economic superpower, which was built and expanded on the backs of the Israelite people. The Israelites endured this for 400 years. They were suffering. 400 years. Yeah, 400 years. They were suffering. They were crying out in pain. And they were crying out to be released from this slavery. God, in this text, hears their pleas, sees their suffering, and she responds by covenanting to free the Israelite people, to liberate them from these human rights abuses. Now, if we wanted to use some contemporary language here, language that we've been hearing a lot about, the law, then what we could say is that in this system, in the Egyptian governmental system, it was absolutely the law to enslave the Israelites. And so to leave that system, to break free from that system, would also be breaking the law. God's response here illustrates to us the desire that God has for freedom. the desire that God has for liberation, the desire that God has to abolish slavery. Moses is called upon in this time to lead the people, to guide them, to sojourn with them, to advocate for them, and to accompany them through their migration process. Now, there's a lot that we can say about Moses. Moses has a particularly important role here as an advocate because God calls him to speak to Pharaoh on the Israelites' behalf, to tell Pharaoh, let my people go. He's also has the role to give instructions to the Israelites so they know what to come and they know what they need to be doing and they know where they need to be. He's also called to accompany the Israelites through all of the plagues and lead them out of the land of Egypt to their final destination, a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, something about Moses that's really important for us to remember is that Moses has kind of some privileges here in this context, because Moses has the ability to access Pharaoh in a way that most Israelites never would have been. Moses' mother gave Moses over to the Egyptians and was raised in the same home as Pharaoh. And so they knew each other. They had a relationship. He also understood the customs. He understood the rules. He understood the system in a way that maybe most people wouldn't have because he'd had that inside look. And so the story illustrates a few things to us. It illustrates that there is an abuse of power. It illustrates that there is oppression and human rights abuses that are going on. It illustrates to us that God has a desire for liberation. We also see that migration has been occurring since the beginning of time, that it's what we do as humans. We move about, we migrate. And we also see that in these times that there is a need for companion support and advocacy. Now, by definition, the word advocate means one who pleads the cause of another, or one who supports or promotes the interests or the cause of another. Some advocates have specialized skills or knowledge that can help along the way. For instance, I work with domestic violence advocates, and some of them have specialized knowledge around the legal system or housing resources that are really needed. But all advocates are trained in the foundational things of compassion, of empathic listening, of coming alongside people, and of figuring out ways to use their voice in a system that would oppress and disenfranchise and diminish the voices of those that need it most to demand for change. These advocates understand the impact of trauma, the difficulty it can be to navigate these systems, and they understand how difficult it can be to get to places that are safe. And they're equipped to interact in ways that are culturally meaningful. To be an advocate, particularly a companioning advocate, which I'll discuss a little bit more, you don't have to have any special training or certification. In fact, I'm certain that many of us are playing roles as companioning advocates in our communities every single day. I see it. I hear about it from you. And so I want to say that keep doing that. We need to keep doing that. That's what's needed right now. But I also hope that in sharing some additional thoughts about how we can companion with people, that it serves as an encouragement, one, to the things that we're already doing, but also expands our thoughts and our hearts as to more that we can be doing in our communities. So back in the day when I was a pastor, I worked in Ballard, and we worked with, primarily my outreach was to men and women that were dealing with homelessness. And I was putting together some programming to do some outreach with this community, and I was really interested in doing a kind of advocacy approach that wasn't being commonly used. I wanted something that was grounded in compassion and grounded in us coming alongside of one another and doing life together. And so in my search for a model like that, I came across this man named Craig Rennebaum. Maybe you've heard of him. He wrote this book, Souls in the Hands of a Tender God. He's actually a chaplain here in Seattle. He's retired. But he did his work here in Seattle on Capitol Hill. And I read his book, and I was just moved by the work that he was doing, because he has just such a beautiful way of just coming alongside people, seeing people in their humanity and in their dignity, and just doing life with people is what he's really about. And so I somehow got a hold of him and asked him to come out to our church and teach us. What does it mean to companion? What does it mean to come alongside people? What does it mean to do life with each other, especially when we're having such different experiences in life? And he came out and he shared with us some key things. He shared that hospitality, walking side by side, listening and accompanying each other is where this kind of advocacy is at. This is how we do life with one another. So I want to kind of contextualize that in what we're talking about regarding immigration. In terms of hospitality, it is us as a community saying everyone is welcome and everyone is safe, and figuring out ways to provide practical space for people to be safe. We understand in this model of hospitality that safety means something very different for every single person. And so part of that is talking about what it means to be a sanctuary space. What does it mean to open up our homes? What does it mean to open up our churches, to provide sanctuary space for people so that when ICE is targeting people, they have a place to go where they will not be detained. A few of us went out to the rapid response meeting on Tuesday, and it was such a great meeting, wasn't it? Chris was there, and Cyrus was there, and Terry was there. And it was so full of energy and so full of passion to hear people's different stories about how they're doing this in their communities and how faith communities all over the city can work together to provide more resources. And what we learned is that there's someone here in Seattle that is currently in a sanctuary space. And so we have a phone number that we can call. There's kind of like this hotline of information that can go around to be able to respond quickly so that this person can remain safe. And if you're interested in having that information or being on that list, please let us know. Chris is here. I'm happy to also help you out with that. Because this is what we need in terms of hospitality right now, is we need to open up our homes, we need to open up our churches, and we need to find sanctuary space to keep people safe. Walking side by side means that we join others in collaboration toward their independence and their liberation. This means that we are not the experts of other stories, but we are willing to come alongside people to acknowledge their autonomy and that their needs. And we join them in that process. And so this advocacy approach is not based on a hierarchy, rather it's based on a relationship. It's based on a partnership. And then to accompaniment. Accompaniment really means to go with. To go with so that people do not have to go alone. There was another example that came up from the rapid response meeting about this person that was imbuing at an apartment, and ICE showed up and was coming to detain this person. And the apartment manager there stopped ICE, actually called the Immigration Solidarity Network. They got them on the phone. They completely were able to hold off this ICE person until somebody showed up and actually ICE had to leave. That's part of accompaniment. It can be that we have to go with people to certain places like court, but it can also mean that we show up on behalf of people because it's not safe for them to be there. I want to close by reading a quote from Craig. God calls us to make out of our struggles new Edens, to become Abrahams and Sarahs on journeys from what is and has been to new destinations, to be in Exodus, to walk with each other through suffering to new habitations of promise and possibility. Illness cannot take from us our deepest identity. We are each of us anointed, touched with holy purpose, made to be bearers of the Spirit and full incarnations of God's love and grace in the world. We are the acts that give birth to the sacred. We together are the acts that give birth to the sacred, to safety, to refuge, to community. I want to say that one more time. We in community together are the acts that give birth to the sacred. Amen. My benediction prayer today is simple, that as we heed the call to be companions, to be sisters and brothers to those that most need it in our communities, that we find life, and that we find life abundantly, that gives us the strength and the courage to stay the course together. May you go in peace.